That's her, he spat, a fleck of something landing on my cheek. Not the kind of grime you wipe away. Survival kind of grime. Three goons pressed closer, but I kept my eyes on the girl. 15, maybe? She stared at the cracked diner floor, face bruised like a bad peach. Her secret? A past only I knew. They think she's a helpless kid, see? Dead wrong. This ain't about a rescue. It's about the reckoning coming for these bastards. Compassion is about to bite them hard. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. She offered me a coffee. Black. Now? Rage delivered neat. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The evening sun painted long shadows across the tarmac at JFK International Airport as passengers began boarding Flight 447, a red-eye bound for London. Among the steady stream of travelers, Naomi Walker moved with deliberate slowness, her worn jeans and oversized Northwestern University hoodie helping her blend into the crowd. At 35, she carried herself with a peculiar contradiction. Shoulders that wanted to stand at attention but forced themselves to slouch. Eyes that scanned the boarding area with practiced precision before deliberately unfocusing. "Welcome aboard," the gate agent said cheerfully, scanning her boarding pass. Naomi offered a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and made her way down the jet bridge. The aircraft hummed with that particular energy of pre-flight anticipation. Business travelers stowed their laptops with practiced efficiency. Families negotiated seat assignments, and the flight attendants moved through their preparations with choreographed precision. Naomi found her seat, 32B, a middle seat in economy, and settled in without complaint. Most people would have grimaced at the assignment, but she seemed almost relieved to disappear between two other passengers. To her left by the window sat Margaret Foster, a chatty woman in her 60s wearing too much perfume and clutching a romance novel. To her right on the aisle, a businessman named David Brooks was already typing furiously on his laptop, his jaw clenched with the kind of tension that suggested this flight was one of many in an endless cycle of meetings and deadlines. "First time to London, dear?" Margaret asked, already leaning into Naomi's space with the enthusiasm of someone who viewed flights as social opportunities. "No, ma'am," Naomi replied softly, pulling her hood up and closing her eyes. "Just tired." Margaret's face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly, turning to her book with a small huff. Naomi had perfected the art of polite dismissal, friendly enough not to offend, distant enough to discourage further attempts at conversation. 3 rows ahead, a family was settling in with the controlled chaos that came with traveling with children. The Andersons, Tom and Sarah, with their twins, Emma and Jacob, both 8, were already deep in negotiations about who got the window seat for takeoff. Sarah Anderson caught the eye of flight attendant, offering an apologetic smile that said, "We'll try to keep them quiet, but no promises." The flight attendants moved through their routines, but there was something different about their demeanor tonight. Jennifer Martinez, the lead flight attendant with 15 years of experience, exchanged glances with her colleague Robert Hayes as they counted passengers. They'd both noticed a group of 4 soldiers in uniform boarding earlier, heading home from deployment. The men looked exhausted, their thousand-y stares suggesting they'd seen more than they cared to remember. One of them, Sergeant Marcus Williams, kept checking his phone, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. But it wasn't the soldiers that had caught Jennifer's attention most. It was the man in 38F who had pulled low despite the warm evening, oversized sunglasses still on, even though they'd been inside for 20 minutes. He'd barely spoken when boarding, just pointed to his seat assignment when asked. His carry-on bag had seemed unusually heavy when he lifted it into the overhead compartment, the muscles in his arms straining more than they should for what appeared to be a simple backpack. Captain James Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, his silver hair and weathered face suggesting decades of experience. At 58, he'd flown through everything from volcanic ash clouds to hurricane evacuations. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the weather reports showing clear skies that somehow didn't match the unease in his gut. Or maybe it was just the accumulation of too many years, too many flights, too many close calls that nobody ever heard about. "Good evening, folks." His voice came over the intercom, warm and reassuring with that particular pilot draw that suggested everything was under control. "This is your captain speaking. We're looking at a smooth flight to London tonight. About 7 hours and 20 minutes in the air. Weather's looking good, and we should have you at Heathrow right on schedule. Sit back, relax, and let us take care of you tonight." But even as he spoke, his co-pilot, First Officer Alan Peterson, was frowning at something on his radar screen. "Jim, you seeing this?" Reynolds leaned over. "What am I looking at?" "Probably nothing. Just thought I saw something at our 7-hour about 40 m out. Moving fast. It's gone now." "Keep an eye on it," Reynolds said, though he kept his voice casual. "No need to worry about phantoms on the radar." Not yet. Back in 32B, Naomi had already drifted off, or at least appeared to have. Her breathing was steady, but not quite the deep rhythm of true sleep. Her fingers tucked inside her hoodie pocket, occasionally twitched, muscle memory from years of gripping something that wasn't there anymore. Margaret Foster glanced at her occasionally, something about the younger woman's stillness making her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The plane pushed back from the gate with the usual series of mechanical sounds that were of the push-back tug, the initial startup of the engines, the various clicks and hums that frequent flyers could identify with their eyes closed. The safety demonstration played on the screens, though most passengers ignored it, absorbed in their phones for those last few minutes of connection before airplane mode became mandatory. It was during the taxi to the runway that the first unusual thing happened. A loud thud echoed from the cargo hold, sharp enough to make several passengers look up from their devices. The plane was still moving, but there was a momentary pause in the flight attendant's movements. Jennifer picked up the intercom quickly. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was just some cargo shifting during our taxi. Nothing to worry about. We'll make sure everything is secure before takeoff." But she exchanged another glance with Robert. Cargo didn't usually shift during taxi. Not like that. Not with that kind of impact. The man in 38F, whose boarding pass identified him as Michael Smith, though that almost certainly wasn't his real name, shifted in his seat. His hands, which had been steady until now, showed the slightest tremor. He pulled his bag down from the overhead compartment, ostensibly to retrieve something, but his movements were too careful, too deliberate. He placed it under the seat in front of him instead of returning it overhead. As the plane lined up for takeoff, Captain Reynolds walked back through the cabin. Unusual for this stage of flight, but he played it off as a final check. His eyes moved across the passengers with practiced assessment. The soldiers exhausted but alert. The family already deep in the ritual of keeping children calm. The business travelers, the tourists, the elderly couple holding hands across the aisle. His gaze lingered on Naomi for just a moment longer than the others. Something about her posture, even in sleep, the way her feet were positioned, ready to move, the placement of her hands. He'd seen that kind of ready stillness before in people who'd been trained to go from zero to action in heartbeat. But he moved on, filing the observation away. "Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff," came Peterson's voice over the intercom. The engines roared to life with that distinctive building whine, pressing everyone back into their seats as Flight 447 accelerated down the runway. The nose lifted and they were airborne, New York falling away beneath them in a glittering sprawl of lights. For the first 20 minutes, everything was normal. Drink orders were taken, the seatbelt sign turned off, and passengers settled into the rhythms of a long flight. Some pulled out books, others queued up movies, and many, like Naomi, appeared asleep. But she wasn't sleeping. Behind her closed lids, her mind was running through calculations she hadn't made in years. The angle of climb, the engine performance, the subtle shifts in heading as they adjusted course. Old habits died hard, and some never died at all. They just went dormant, waiting in her half-conscious state. Memories flickered. The weight of a flight helmet, the rush of G-forces, the voice of her wingman through the radio static. She pushed them down, forced her breathing to remain steady. That was another life, another person. She was just Naomi Walker now, nobody special, going to London for a conference she had no intention of attending. The ticket had been an excuse to fly, to feel the familiar sensation of leaving Earth behind, even if she was just a passenger. Now, outside the window, if anyone had been looking at just the right moment, they might have seen a shadow against the clouds, something moving parallel to their course, but at a different altitude. But the Anderson twins were busy with their tablets, and Margaret Foster was absorbed in her novel, and a shadow passed unnoticed. In the cockpit, Peterson frowned at his instruments again. "Jim, I'm getting that reading again. Stronger this time." Reynolds looked over. "How far?" 20 millers in closing. Speed doesn't match any commercial traffic. Could be military. There's an exercise scheduled off the coast." "Yeah, maybe," Peterson said. But he didn't sound convinced. Military exercises were usually communicated to commercial traffic. This wasn't on any notice. The plane had been in the air for just over an hour when the first real turbulence hit. It wasn't the gentle rocking that passengers barely noticed, or even the moderate bumps that made people grip their armrests. This was sudden, violent, throwing the aircraft sideways in a motion that shouldn't have been possible in the clear skies they were flying through. Drinks spilled, overhead compartments rattled. Someone's tablet went flying into the aisle. The Andersons' daughter, Emma, let out a frightened cry, immediately soothed by her mother's practiced reassurance. But Sarah Anderson's eyes were wide as she held her children, her own fear barely contained. Naomi's eyes snapped open at the first jolt, her body instinctively adjusting to the motion. Her feet spread wider, finding purchase, her hands gripping the armrest with precise pressure. Not the white-knuckled panic of a frightened passenger, but the controlled response of someone used to unstable environments. Margaret Foster, who had grabbed Naomi's arm in fear, noticed the younger woman wasn't even breathing hard. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom, and there was something in his tone that made even the experienced travelers pay attention. "We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please be seated." But Reynolds knew this wasn't turbulence. Not really. The weather radar showed clear skies for hundreds of miles. The aircraft's sensors weren't detecting any wind shear or atmospheric disturbance, which meant something else had caused that jolt. Something external. In seat 38F, Michael Smith, or whatever his name really was gripping his seat so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, and he was muttering something under his breath. The language wasn't English, though he'd spoken perfect American English when forced to interact with the crew earlier. The passenger next to him, a college student named Tyler Johnson, tried to lean away without being obvious about it. "You okay, man?" Tyler asked, though he immediately regretted drawing attention to himself. The hooded man's head snapped toward him, and for a moment, Tyler saw his eyes behind those dark glasses, wide with something that looked like terror. "It's too early," the man whispered more to himself and to Tyler. "They weren't supposed to." He cut himself off, pulling his bag closer. Jennifer Martinez, strapped into her jump seat, noticed the interaction. She'd been watching that passenger since boarding, and now every instinct she'd developed over 15 years was screaming that something was very wrong. She caught Robert's eye and nodded toward 38F. He'd seen it too. 10-year-old Jacob Anderson was pressed against the window, his face illuminated by the reading light as he stared out into the darkness. "Mom," he said, tugging on Sarah's sleeve. "Mom, there's another plane out there." "That's nice, honey," Sarah responded absently, still trying to calm his sister. "No, Mom, really. It's really close. Like, really, really close." Tom Anderson leaned over his son to look out the window. For a moment, he saw nothing but stars and the faint glow of moonlight on clouds below. Then something moved across his field of vision, a dark shape against the darker sky, maybe a few hundred yards away. It was gone before he could fully process what he'd seen. "Probably just another commercial flight, buddy," he told his son, but he kept watching the window. In 32B, Naomi had noticed the child's observation. Without making it obvious, she shifted slightly to get a better angle on the windows across the aisle. Her trained eyes picked up what others might miss. The faint reflection of navigation lights that shouldn't be there, moving in a pattern that didn't match any standard commercial flight path. The plane jolted again, less violently this time, but with a strange rolling motion that made several passengers grab for their sick bags. This wasn't turbulence. Naomi recognized it immediately. Wake vortex, the spiral of disturbed air left behind by another aircraft. But no commercial plane should be close enough for them to hit its wake. Not at this altitude, not on this flight path. She was fully awake now, though she kept her eyes half closed, maintaining the appearance of a drowsy passenger. Her mind was running through possibilities, none of them good. The repeated jolts, the pattern of the disturbance, the nervous behavior of the passenger in 38F, pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve, but couldn't help assembling. Jennifer had made a decision. Despite the seatbelt sign, she unbuckled and made her way carefully toward the cockpit, using the seats for support. As the plane continued to experience intermittent shudders, she knocked on the cockpit door. 3 short, 2 long, the code for urgent but not emergency. Reynolds opened the door slightly. "Jennifer, you should be seated. Captain, we have a passenger in 38F who's exhibiting extremely suspicious behavior and whatever's happening with the plane." He seemed to know it was coming. Reynolds' expression darkened. He glanced back at Peterson, who was still monitoring the radar. "We're being shadowed," he said quietly. "There's an aircraft following us, not responding to any communication attempts. We've tried switching frequencies, even guard. Nothing." Jennifer's face palled. Guard frequency was the emergency channel monitored by everyone. If someone wasn't responding on guard, they either couldn't or wouldn't. "What do you want us to do?" she asked. "Keep an eye on that passenger. Quietly. Don't cause a panic. I'm going to come back and take a look myself in a few minutes. Make it look routine." Jennifer nodded and made her way back, stopping to check on passengers as though nothing was wrong, offering reassurances about the turbulence. When she reached 38F, she made a point of checking the overhead compartments, getting a closer look at the hooded man. He was clutching something in his pocket, something rectangular, about the size of a phone, but thicker. Back in her seat, Naomi was watching it all unfold through barely opened eyes. She saw Jennifer's careful observation, noticed the tension in the flight attendant's shoulders, the way her professional smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She saw the hooded man's nervous movements, the way he kept checking his watch, an expensive military-style chronometer that seemed at odds with his otherwise unremarkable appearance. Another passenger had noticed the tension too. James Crawford, identified by some of the crew as an ex-cop from the way he carried himself and observed his surroundings, had shifted in his seat to get a better view of 38F. 20 years on the Chicago police force had taught him to read situations, and everything about this one was reading wrong. The plane lurched again, harder this time. Oxygen masks dropped from several compartments, dangling for a moment before automatically retracting, a malfunction that shouldn't happen without a loss of cabin pressure. Gas filled the cabin. Someone started crying. The Anderson twins clung to their parents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Reynolds' voice came again, and this time the strain was audible. "We're experiencing some technical irregularities. Nothing to be alarmed about, but I'm going to ask everyone to remain seated with seatbelts securely fastened. We may need to adjust our altitude." But Naomi heard what he wasn't saying. Technical irregularities didn't cause oxygen masks to deploy, and adjusting altitude was pilot speak for evasive maneuvering. Whatever was following them was getting more aggressive. The hooded man suddenly stood up, ignoring the seatbelt sign, and headed toward the lavatory. Jennifer started to intercept him, but he moved with surprising speed, locking himself inside before she could reach him. She pressed her ear to the door and heard him talking. No, arguing with someone, but he was alone in there, which meant he was on a phone or radio. Crawford, the ex-cop, had seen enough. He unbuckled and moved to position himself near the lavatory, ready to act if needed. He caught Jennifer's eye and nodded. He had her back. In the cockpit, Peterson was getting increasingly agitated. "Jim, it's matching our course changes. Every adjustment we make, it mirrors within seconds. This isn't random. We're being hunted. Reynolds have been flying for 30 years. He dealt with hijacking attempts, medical emergencies, engine failures, and weather that would make most pilots consider early retirement. But this was new. This was something else entirely. "Try ATC again," he ordered. "Send a code of distress. Don't make it obvious, but let them know we have a situation." Peterson keyed the radio using subtle language that any controller would recognize as a call for help without alerting anyone who might be listening. But the response was static. Then for just a moment, a voice broke through, not air traffic control, but someone else speaking in accented English. "Flight 447. Maintain current heading and altitude. Comply and no one will be harmed." Reynolds and Peterson exchanged glances. This had just gone from suspicious to confirmed hostile. Back in the cabin, Naomi had made a decision. She couldn't maintain the pretense of sleep any longer, not with the situation escalating. She opened her eyes fully, sitting up straighter, her entire demeanor shifting subtly. Margaret Foster, still clutching her romance novel like a lifeline, noticed the change immediately. "You're not really just tired, are you?" Margaret whispered with the intuition that came from raising 4 children and knowing when someone was putting on an act. Naomi turned to her, and Margaret saw something in those eyes that made her breath catch. A depth of experience of capability that had nothing to do with attending conferences or taking vacation trips to London. "Ma'am," Naomi said quietly, "in a few minutes, things might get complicated. When they do, I need you to keep your head down and follow the crew's instructions exactly. Can you do that for me?" Margaret nodded, suddenly very aware that the tired young woman in the middle seat might be the most important person on this plane. The lavatory door opened, and the hooded man emerged. His face was pale, sweat soaking through his shirt. He looked around wildly, as if searching for something or someone, then locked eyes with Naomi. For a moment, recognition flickered across his features. Not of her specifically, but of what she represented. The way she sat, the way she watched him, the controlled readiness in her posture. He started to back away, but Crawford was there blocking his retreat. "Sir, I think you need to return to your seat," the ex-cop said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "You don't understand," the man said, his accent now apparent. "Eastern European, maybe Russian. They're coming. They're already here. The package. They want the package." "What package?" Crawford demanded. But the man had already pushed past him, practically running back to his seat. Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, moving through the cabin with forced calm. His eyes swept across the passengers, lingering on the hooded man, on Crawford, on Jennifer, who was trying to maintain order, and finally on Naomi. Their eyes met for a moment, and he saw something there that made him pause. Recognition, not of her face, but of her type. He'd flown with enough military personnel to recognize one even in civilian clothes. He made his way back to the cockpit, his mind racing. They were 2 hours from the nearest suitable airport for emergency landing. They had an unidentified aircraft shadowing them, a passenger who clearly knew more than he should, and no communication with the ground. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and he was running out of options. That's when the plane shuddered again. But this time it was different. This time, everyone heard the sound. A high-pitched whine followed by a flash of light outside the windows. The shadowing aircraft had just fired a flare across their nose. A warning shot. The cabin erupted. Screams, crying, prayers in multiple languages. Parents clutched children. Strangers grabbed each other's hands. The soldiers snapped to alertness, their training kicking. And even though they were helpless in this situation and in seat 32B, Naomi Walker closed her eyes for just a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, she was no longer hiding. The mask was off, and underneath was someone who had once been Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Walker, one of the Air Force's most decorative fighter pilots before she disappeared from service under classified circumstances. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her voice cutting through the panic with military authority. Everyone remained calm and seated. Flight crew, initiate emergency protocols. The cabin fell silent, all eyes turning to her. Captain Reynolds, watching from the cockpit door, felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Help had arrived, but from the most unexpected source. The question now was whether it would be enough. The silence that followed Naomi's commanding voice lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Every eye in the cabin was fixed on her. This woman who moments ago had been just another sleeping passenger, and now stood with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Captain Reynolds moved quickly down the aisle toward her, his weathered face a mixture of desperate hope and professional skepticism. The plane shuddered again, a reminder that whatever was happening outside wasn't waiting for them to figure things out. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, his voice low enough that only those nearest could hear, "I don't know who you are, but if you have any experience, that might help." "Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Walker," she said quietly, meeting his eyes. "Former F-22 pilot, 94th Fighter Squadron. And right now, Captain, You need to tell me everything about what's happening up there. Reynolds' eyes widened slightly. He'd heard that name before years ago, in the kind of conversations pilots had in airport bars after too many drinks. The female fighter pilot who disappeared from service after a classified incident. The one who'd supposedly outflown half the Air Force in combat exercises before vanishing from the military entirely. "We've got an unidentified aircraft shadowing us," he said quickly, not responding to any communication attempts. "They've cut us off from ATC somehow. Jamming maybe, and they just fired a warning shot." Naomi's jaw tightened. She glanced toward the window, calculating angles and distances with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent thousands of hours thinking in 3 dimensions. "How long have they been with us?" "First contact about 90 minutes ago. They've been matching our course changes perfectly." "Show me your radar readings," she said, already moving toward the cockpit. Then louder, addressing the cabin, everyone remained seated. Flight attendants secure all loose items and prepare for possible evasive maneuvers. Jennifer Martinez, despite her fear, immediately began following the orders. There was something about Naomi's tone that brooked no argument, no hesitation. This was someone who knew what she was doing. As they reached the cockpit door, Reynolds hesitated. "I need to know. Can I trust you?" "Your service record, the way you left." "Captain," Naomi said, her voice steady but urgent. "In about 30 seconds, that aircraft is going to make another pass. They're testing your responses, seeing how you react. Right now, I'm the only person on this plane who has any chance of understanding what they want and how to counter it. You can question my past later, but right now you need my help." Reynolds made his decision. He opened the cockpit door, ushering her inside. Peterson looked up in surprise as a passenger entered the sacred space of the flight deck. "Jim, what the hell? She's military fighter pilot," Reynolds said tersely. "Show her the radar." Naomi leaned over the instruments, her eyes quickly scanning the displays. Her whole demeanor had changed. Gone was any pretense of being a civilian. Her movements were precise, economical, professional. There she pointed to a blip on the radar. "See how they're maintaining position just outside your cast range? They know exactly where your collision avoidance system's limits are. This isn't some amateur. This is someone with military training." The radio crackled to life again, the same accented voice. "Flight 447, begin descent to flight level 180. You have 2 minutes to comply." "If we descend to 18,000 FT," Peterson began, "we'll be in perfect position for a forced landing at any number of small airfields," Naomi finished. "We're low enough for mid-air boarding if they're really ambitious." Reynolds stared at her. "Mid-air boarding? That's impossible." "It's been done," Naomi said quietly. "Twice that I know of, both times with inside help." Her eyes narrowed. That passenger in 38 Eve, he knows something. Back in the cabin, the tension was reaching a breaking point. The hooded man, Michael Smith, or whatever his real name was, had curled into himself, clutching his bag like his life depended on it. Crawford, the ex-cop, had positioned himself where he could watch both the suspicious passenger and the cockpit door. The Anderson family was holding each other tightly. Sarah was trying to keep the twins calm, but her own fear was bleeding through. "It's just like really bad turbulence," she kept saying, though nobody believed it anymore, least of all her. Sergeant Williams and his fellow soldiers, Martinez, Thompson, and Davis, had moved subtly into defensive positions without even discussing it. Their training wouldn't let them sit passive in a crisis, even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. Margaret Foster, still in her window seat, was praying quietly, her romance novel forgotten on her lap. But she kept glancing at the empty middle seat where Naomi had been, wondering who exactly she'd been sitting next to for the past 2 hours. In the cockpit, Naomi was rapidly processing information. "Captain, I need you to key a radio to guard frequency, but don't say anything. Just key it for 3 seconds, then release. Then do it again. 2 short bursts." "What will that do?" Reynolds asked, even as he followed her instructions. "If there's anyone listening, military, civilian, anyone, they'll recognize it as a distress pattern. We might not be able to talk, but we can signal." She turned to Peterson. "Start a very gradual descent. Make it look like you're complying, but drag it out. Buy us time." Time for what? Peterson asked. For me to figure out what they really want, Naomi said. She looked at Reynolds. I need to talk to your suspicious passenger, the one the flight attendant mentioned. That could be dangerous. Captain, everything about this situation is dangerous. But that man knows something, and we need to know what it is. Reynolds nodded slowly. Jennifer can bring him up here. No, Naomi said. Too obvious. They're watching, probably monitoring. I'll go to him. Make it look routine. She started to leave the cockpit, then paused. Captain, whatever happens, don't let them force you below 15,000 left. Above that, you still have options. Below that, she didn't finish the sentence. Naomi made her way back through the cabin, moving with a steady confidence of someone who belonged there. She stopped at several seats, appearing to check on passengers, offering calm reassurances. To anyone watching, she looked like she might be an off-duty flight attendant helping out. But her path was deliberate, designed to bring her to seat 38F without seeming obvious about it. When she reached the hooded man, she knelt in the aisle beside him, her voice low and steady. I know you're scared. I know they're coming for you. But if you don't tell me what's going on, everyone on this plane is going to pay the price for whatever you're carrying. The man's head snapped up, his eyes wide behind those dark glasses. You don't understand. You can't understand. If they get it, what is it? Naomi pressed. What are you carrying? He clutched his bag tighter. Codes, he whispered. Satellite override codes. They were supposed to be delivered quietly, but someone leaked. They found out. They're here to take them. Naomi's blood ran cold. Satellite override codes could be used to take control of military satellites, redirect them, or even crash them into other objects in orbit. In the wrong hands, they could cause catastrophic damage. Who are they? She asked. Mercenaries. Former military. They call themselves the Grey Wing. Their leader. He stopped, his face paling even further. What about their leader? He used to be American Air Force. Like you, the man had noticed her bearing, her manner of speaking. They say he was one of the best pilots ever trained before he went rogue. They call him Spectre. Naomi felt the world tilt slightly. Spectre. She knew that call sign. She knew it because she'd flown with him for 3 years. Marcus Webb, her former wingman, the pilot who'd been by her side through countless missions until that final fatal operation that had ended her career and apparently begun his transformation into something else entirely. She stood slowly, her mind racing. If Marcus was out there, if he was behind this, then the situation was far worse than she'd imagined. He knew her tactics, her thinking, her weaknesses, and worse, he knew she was the type of person who would do anything to protect innocent lives. Stay in your seat, she told the hooded man. Don't do anything to draw attention. She made her way back toward the cockpit, but stopped when she noticed Crawford, the ex-cop, watching her intently. Their eyes met, and she made a decision. She moved to his seat, leaning down as if checking on him. You're law enforcement. She said it wasn't a question. Retired, Crawford replied. 20 years Chicago PD, I need your help. That man in 38F is carrying something that the people following us want. We need to make sure they don't get it. Crawford's eyes sharpened. What do you need me to do? Watch him. If he tries to do anything, destroy the codes, communicate with someone, anything, stop him, but quietly. We can't afford to panic. Understood. Crawford shifted slightly, improving his angle of observation. Who are you exactly? Someone trying to keep us all alive, Naomi replied, already moving away. The plane lurched suddenly, harder than before. This time it wasn't turbulence or wake vortex. Through the windows, passengers could see another aircraft pulling alongside, close enough to make out its dark silhouette against the stars. Too close. Dangerously close. Screams erupted throughout the cabin. The Anderson twins started crying. Several passengers began praying aloud. The soldiers tensed, their hands instinctively reaching for weapons they didn't have. Naomi reached the cockpit door just as Reynolds was opening it to come out. They're right beside us, he said, his professional calm cracking slightly. They're trying to force us down. Let me talk to them, Naomi said. They're not responding. They'll respond to me. She pushed past him into the cockpit, grabbing the radio. She switched to guard frequency. the emergency channel that every aircraft monitored and spoke clearly. Gray Wing Flight. This is Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Walker. I know you're listening. Marcus, let's talk. The silence stretched for long seconds. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 5 years came through the speakers. Older, rougher, but unmistakably Marcus Webb. Well, Vixen herself. I wondered if you were aboard when I saw the passenger manifest. Naomi Walker flying commercial. How the mighty have fallen. Peterson looked at her in shock. She knew these people. Marcus, whatever you're being paid, it's not worth killing a plane full of innocent people, Naomi said. Who said anything about killing anyone? Marcus replied, and she could hear that familiar, cocky tone that had once made him the squadron's favorite and most frustrating pilot. We just want your friend in 38F is carrying. Hand it over and everyone goes home safe. You know I can't do that. You mean you won't? Still playing by the rules. Even after they threw you away, even after they destroyed your career for doing the right thing. The words hit harder than she'd expected, but she kept her voice steady. This isn't about me or you or what happened 5 years ago. This is about 200 innocent people. Everything's about what happened 5 years ago, Naomi. That's when we both learned what the rules are really worth. The aircraft outside pulled even closer, its wing lights filling the cockpit with alternating red and green flashes. Reynolds had to fight the instinct to bank away. At this altitude and speed, any sudden movement could be catastrophic. Marcus, pull back, Naomi said into the radio, her voice carrying the authority she'd once wielded as a superior officer. You're endangering everyone with this proximity. Negative, Vixen, you have something we need, and we're not leaving without it. You can either cooperate or things get uncomfortable for everyone aboard your flying bus. Through the cockpit windows, Naomi could see the modified fighter jet more clearly now. It was a civilian aircraft, but heavily modified. Probably an old L-39 Albatross or similar. The kind of military trainer that ended up on the civilian market after the Cold War. Fast, agile, and in the right hands, deadly. She turned to Reynolds. How much fuel do we have? Enough to reach London with standard reserves. But if we have to start maneuvering, we won't last long, she finished. And he knows it. Back in the cabin, Jennifer was doing her best to maintain order. But it was a losing battle. The proximity of the other aircraft was visible to everyone on the starboard side, and word was spreading quickly to the rest of the passengers. The hooded man in 38F had gone completely rigid, his knuckles white as he clutched his bag. Crawford had moved closer, now sitting just across the aisle from him. Whatever you're carrying, the ex-cop said quietly, maybe it's time to consider giving it up. It's not worth all these lives. You don't understand, the man hissed. If they get these codes, they could crash satellites into cities, disable defense networks, cause chaos you can't imagine. Thousands could die. Thousands versus 200, Crawford said grimly. That's the mathematics of it. That's exactly the mathematics of it. Margaret Foster, who had been quietly praying, suddenly spoke up from her window seat. That woman, Naomi, she'll figure something out. Did you see her eyes? She's done this before. Nobody's done this before. The hooded man said desperately, this is unprecedented. But Margaret shook her head. Maybe not this exactly, but that woman has faced death before and won. I can tell my late husband was military Navy pilot in Vietnam. He had the same look. The ones who survived the impossible things. They all had that look. In the cockpit, Naomi was rapidly running through scenarios. She knew Marcus's flying style, his tactics, his weaknesses. He'd always been aggressive, perhaps too aggressive. It had made him a formidable combat pilot, but also predictable in some ways. Captain, I need you to start a gradual turn to heading 270, she said. That takes us off course. Trust me, and reduce speed by 10 knots very gradually. Reynolds exchanged glances with Peterson, but complied. The big aircraft began its slow adjustment. What are you doing, Vixen? Marcus's voice came over the radio. Don't try to be clever. Just looking for smoother air, Marcus, she replied calmly. These passengers are scared enough without turbulence. But she was actually doing something else, positioning the aircraft so that the rising sun, still an hour from breaking the horizon, would eventually be directly behind them. It was a fighter pilot's tactic, using natural elements as weapons. Marcus would recognize it eventually, but by then she hoped to have another plan in motion. I need to go back out there, she told Reynolds. Keep him talking. Ask him about his aircraft, his fuel status, anything to keep him engaged. And whatever you do, don't descend below $20,000 info. She left the cockpit and made her way directly to the hooded man. This time she didn't kneel beside him. She stood in the aisle where everyone could see her, projecting authority. What's your real name? She asked him. He hesitated. Then Victor Klov. Victor, I need you to listen very carefully. The man on that plane out there, I know him. He's dangerous, but he's also predictable. We're going to get through this, but I need your help. What can I do? I'm just a courier. You can start by telling me everything about those codes. What systems do they control? How long are they valid? Is there a way to partially corrupt them so they be useless? Victor's eyes widened slightly. There might be. The codes are encrypted in layers. If I delete certain segments, they'd look intact but wouldn't function. But if they realize what I've done, they'll kill us all anyway, Naomi said bluntly. Marcus Webb doesn't leave witnesses. That's why he's perfect for this kind of work. The soldiers have been listening from their seats nearby. Sergeant Williams stood up, moving closer. Ma'am, if you're military, we're at your disposal. We might not have weapons, but we've got training. Naomi assessed them quickly. Young, fit, alert. I might need you for now. Help keep the other passengers calm. If things go bad, I need you ready to assist the flight crew with emergency procedures. Yes, ma'am. She turned back to Victor. Start working on those codes. Make it look like you're protecting them, but actually degrade them. Can you do that? Victor nodded nervously, pulling out a small tablet from his bag. His fingers flew over the screen, entering passwords and navigating through layers of encryption. The plane suddenly banked sharply to the left, throwing everyone against their seats. Through the windows, passengers could see the hostile aircraft had moved to their port side now, even closer than before. Close enough that they could see the pilot, a figure in a dark helmet and oxygen mask, impossible to identify, but radiating menace through body language alone. Ladies and gentlemen, Reynolds' voice came over the intercom, strain evident despite his attempts to sound calm. We're experiencing some traffic conflicts. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We should be through this shortly. But Naomi knew better. Marcus was escalating, pushing boundaries, seeing how far he could go. She'd seen him do this in training exercises. Probe, push, then strike when the opponent was off balance. She made her way back toward the cockpit, but stopped when she heard a commotion behind her. The accomplice, the quiet woman who had been sitting 2 rows behind her original seat, had stood up and was moving toward the mid-cabin door. Crawford was already moving to intercept, but the woman was faster than expected. "Nobody move!" the woman shouted, and Naomi saw the glint of metal in her hand. Not a gun that would have been detected, but what looked like a sharpened piece of metal, probably removed from something in the laboratory. The cabin erupted in fresh panic. Parents pulled children close. Several people ducked below their seats. The soldiers started to move, but Naomi held up a hand, stopping them. "What do you want?" Naomi asked calmly, turning to face the woman. "The codes?" the woman said, her accent matching Victor's Eastern European, but trying to hide it. "Give me the codes, and I open the door." They bored. "Take what they want and leave. Everyone lives. You open that door at this altitude and everyone dies," Naomi said. "Not if we descend first. Tell the captain to take us down to 10,000 Don Full." So that was the plan. Force them low enough for a boarding operation. Marcus had someone on the inside. Someone who'd been waiting for the right moment. "You're assuming they'll keep their word," Naomi said, taking a slow step toward the woman. "You're assuming that once they have what they want, they'll just leave. But you don't know Marcus Webb like I do. Stay back." The woman waved the makeshift weapon, but Naomi kept coming slow and steady. "He's going to kill everyone anyway. You mean Victor, all these innocent people? Because that's what he does now. That's what he became after." She stopped herself. "After what?" the woman demanded. "After I failed to stop him the first time," Naomi said quietly. The confession hung in the air. Several passengers who were listening gasped. Even Crawford looked surprised. 5 years ago, Naomi continued, still moving slowly toward the woman. "Marcus and I were on a mission, classified off the books. We were supposed to destroy a terrorist camp, but when we got there, we realized the intel was wrong. It was a refugee camp. Families, children. I refused to engage. Marcus didn't. The woman's hand was shaking now, the weapon wavering. I tried to stop him, Naomi said. I damaged his aircraft, forced him to abort, but not before he dropped ordnance. 17 civilians died. The Air Force buried it, discharged me for insubordination and attacking a fellow officer, and Marcus disappeared. I thought he was in prison. I was wrong. She was close enough now. In one fluid motion, honed by years of combat training, she grabbed the woman's wrist, twisted, and the weapon clattered to the floor. Crawford was there immediately, restraining the woman with the practiced efficiency of 2 decades in law enforcement. Secure her in the back, Naomi told him. Use whatever you need to keep her contained. As Crawford dragged the accomplice away, Naomi picked up the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is under control. Please remain calm and seated. But she knew it was far from under control. If anything, it was about to get much worse. Marcus played his inside card and lost. He wouldn't have a backup plan. He'd have 3. The radio in the cockpit crackled to life, and Marcus's voice filled the cabin through the open cockpit door. Nice work, Vixen. You always were good at close quarters. But this isn't close quarters anymore. You're in a flying brick and I'm going to fight her. Last chance. Give me the codes or I start putting holes in your fuselage. Naomi rushed to the cockpit. He's bluffing. He won't risk destroying the codes. You sure about that? Reynolds asked. Before she could answer, there was a bright flash outside and something streaked past the aircraft. Not a warning shot this time. It had come close enough that they heard the sonic crack of its passage. That wasn't a bluff, Peterson said, his voice tight with fear. Naomi grabbed the radio. Marcus, you fire on this aircraft and those codes are gone forever. Victor's already set up a dead man switch. Anything happens to us, the codes self-destruct. It was a lie, but a necessary one. She glanced back at Victor, who was watching her with wide eyes. She mouthed the word, play along, and he nodded quickly. You're lying, Marcus said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Am I? You know me, Marcus. You know I plan for contingencies. You taught me that. Remember, always have a backup plan. There was silence on the radio. Outside, the hostile aircraft had pulled back slightly, no longer dangerously close, but still shadowing them. Here's what's going to happen, Naomi said, taking control of the situation. We're going to continue to London. You're going to follow if you want, but you keep your distance. When we land, we can negotiate. But if you fire on this aircraft again, if you endanger these passengers, you get nothing. You don't give the orders anymore. Vixen, you're not a lieutenant colonel. You're nobody. Maybe, Naomi said, but I'm a nobody standing between you and what you want, and we both know I've stopped you before. The tension in the cockpit was suffocating. Reynolds and Peterson watched her, waiting to see if her gambit would work. Finally, Marcus spoke. You've got 1 hour, Naomi. 1 hour to convince me why I shouldn't just take what I want. And trust me, after what you cost me 5 years ago, I'm very motivated to see this end badly for you. The radio went silent. Outside, the hostile aircraft maintained its distance, but didn't leave. Naomi turned to Reynolds. We bought time, but not much. How far to friendly airspace at current speed? About 90 minutes. She closed her eyes, calculating. They needed to stretch that hour somehow. Needed to find a way to Munn interrupted. I'm getting something on the radio. Military frequency. Naomi grabbed the headset. Through the static, she heard a voice she recognized. Colonel James Harrison, her old commanding officer. Lieutenant Colonel Walker, this is Rampart. Actual. We've been monitoring your situation. Help us en route, but you need to buy us 30 minutes. Can you do that? 30 minutes against Marcus Webb, who knew all her tricks, all her tactics. Roger, Rampart, we'll buy you 30 minutes. She handed the headset back and looked at Reynolds and Peterson. Gentlemen, we're about to do some flying that your manual definitely doesn't cover. Are you ready? Reynolds gripped the yoke tighter. We're with you, Colonel. She wasn't a colonel anymore, hadn't been for 5 years. But right now, with 200 lives hanging in the balance, and her former wingmen turned mercenary on their tail, she needed to be everything she once was and more. The 30-minute countdown had begun, and Naomi knew every second would matter. She stood in the cockpit doorway, her mind running combat scenarios while her eyes tracked the hostile aircraft, maintaining its threatening position off their starboard wing. "Captain, I need you to gradually increase altitude," she said to Reynolds. "Make it look like we're struggling with controls." "Erratic, but controlled." "That'll burn more fuel," Peterson protested. "It'll also force Marcus to burn his," Naomi replied. "That's not a long-range aircraft he's flying. He's already been shadowing us for over 2 hours. His fuel situation has to be getting critical." Reynolds began the maneuver, letting the aircraft drift upward in an uneven climb. Through the windows, they could see the hostile jet adjusting its position to match its movements, sharp and aggressive, where others were deliberately sluggish. Back in the cabin, the passengers were reaching their breaking point. The Anderson children had stopped crying, moving into that quiet, shocked state that worried their parents more than tears. Sarah Anderson held them close, whispering stories about brave knights and princesses, trying to transport them anywhere but here. Victor Clough was still working on his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen as he methodically corrupted segments of the satellite codes. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, knowing that if Marcus's people got their hands on his device before he finished, they'd realize what he was doing. Crawford, having secured the accomplice with zip ties from the aircraft's emergency kit, had positioned himself where he could watch both her and the main cabin. The woman sat sullenly, her eyes burning with frustration and fear in equal measure. "You don't understand," she muttered to Crawford. "When he doesn't get what he wants, he doesn't leave witnesses. We're all dead anyway." "Then why help him?" Crawford asked. "Because if I helped, my family had a chance." Now she trailed off, looking out the window at the predatory aircraft beside them. Sergeant Williams approached Naomi as she returned from the cockpit. "Ma'am, my men and we're ready for whatever you need. We might not have weapons, but we've got training." Naomi assessed him and his 3 companions. Young, eager, trained for ground combat, but trapped in an aerial chess match. "Actually, Sergeant, I do have something you can do. I need you to organize the passengers. If we have to make emergency maneuvers, people need to be ready. Families with children in the middle rows away from windows. Anyone with medical conditions identified and monitored. Can you handle that?" "Yes, ma'am." Williams immediately began organizing his men, and they spread through the cabin with quiet efficiency, repositioning passengers without causing additional panic. The plane suddenly lurched harder than before. This time it wasn't turbulence or evasive maneuvering. Through the starboard windows, passengers screamed as they saw another aircraft approaching from below. A second hostile jet rising from the cloud layer, like a shark from dark waters. Where the hell did that come from? Reynolds' voice crackled over the intercom, forgetting that passengers could hear him. Naomi was back in the cockpit in seconds. The new aircraft was identical to Marcus's another modified trainer jet. Her heart sank. Marcus had backup, which meant he'd been planning this for longer than she'd thought. "Greywing 2 is in position." A new voice came over the radio. Female professional cold. "You now have hostile aircraft on both flanks. Compliance is your only option." "Naomi, grab the radio. This is getting crowded up here. You're risking a mid-air collision." "Only if you make sudden movements," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "You taught me about force multiplication, remember? Always have superior numbers." She did remember. She drilled it into him during their training years. Never engage unless you have advantage. He learned his lessons well, maybe too well. "Captain, maintain steady flight," Naomi instructed Reynolds. "No sudden movements, but start a very gradual descent. Make it look like we're complying, but you said not to go below." "I know what I said. Trust me." She turned to Peterson. "What's our current position?" "About 200 memoirs southwest of Ireland, heading northeast." Ireland. NATO airspace was close, but not close enough. The military help Colonel Harrison had promised was still 25 minutes out. They needed to buy more time. Naomi picked up the intercom, addressing the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Colonel Walker. I need everyone to remain calm and follow the crew's instructions." "Exactly. We're going to experience some unusual maneuvering in the next few minutes. This is necessary for your safety." She clicked off and turned to Reynolds. "On my mark, I need you to deploy the speed brakes and drop the gear at this altitude. It'll create massive drag, drop our speed by nearly half instantly. The jets following us will overshoot. They'll have to circle back and that buys us minutes. It could also tear the gear doors off, Peterson said. The 707 is overbuilt, Naomi replied. It can take it, I hope. Through the cockpit windows, she watched Marcus's aircraft. She knew him, knew his patterns. He'd been her wingman for 3 years. She taught him, mentored him, trusted him, and she knew that right now he was getting impatient. Marcus had always hated waiting. Vixen, you're stalling, his voice came over the radio. Start your descent now, or we start putting holes in your aircraft. We're descending, Naomi replied calmly. Check your instruments. They were but barely maybe 500 FRT per minute. Hardly noticeable, but it would keep them occupied for a moment. In the cabin, Victor suddenly looked up from his tablet, his face pale. They're trying to hack in, he said to nobody in particular. Someone's attempting to access the codes remotely. Crawford, who had been listening, moved closer. Can they do that? Not if I disconnect from everything, Victor said, frantically typing. But if I do that, I can't finish corrupting the files. How much longer do you need? Crawford asked. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Crawford looked toward the cockpit, then made a decision. He pulled out his phone, which he kept in airplane mode, and turned it on. If they're trying to hack his device, maybe we can give them something else to focus on. He began turning on every electronic device he could find, asking nearby passengers to do the same. Turn on your phones, tablets, laptops, everything. Create electronic noise. Margaret Foster, who had been quietly observing everything, suddenly spoke up. I have a portable Wi-Fi router in my bag. My grandson insisted I carry it. Would that help? Yes, Crawford said, surprised. Turn it on, set up a network, make it visible. Within moments, dozens of devices were active, creating a fog of electronic signals. Victor's tablet became just one device among many, harder to isolate and target. The second hostile aircraft had moved closer, now visible from the portside windows. Passengers on both sides of the aircraft could see the predators flanking them, and the psychological effect was devastating. Several people were openly weeping. Others sat in shocked silence, holding hands with strangers. 20 minutes until help arrives. Peterson whispered to Naomi, checking his instruments. 20 minutes in aerial combat. That was a lifetime. Entire battles were won and lost in less time. That's when Naomi noticed something. The second aircraft was flying differently than Marcus's. Less aggressive, more mechanical. The pilot was good but not exceptional. And there was something about the way it maintained position. Captain, look at the second aircraft, she said. Notice anything about its flight pattern? Reynolds studied it for a moment. It's very consistent. Same distance, same angle, like it's on autopilot or like the pilot is inexperienced with formation flying, Naomi said. A plan began forming in her mind. I need to make an announcement. She took the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, in approximately 30 seconds, I need everyone to brace for impact. This is a precautionary measure. Flight attendants, secure positions. Jennifer Martinez's voice came over the cabin speaker. Brace positions. Everyone, heads down, feet flat on the floor. Parents pulled children close. The soldiers helped elderly passengers into proper positions. Crawford made sure the accomplice was secured. What are you doing? Reynolds asked nervously. Creating chaos, Naomi replied. She grabbed the radio. Marcus, we have a problem. We're losing hydraulic pressure. Can't maintain altitude. It was a lie, but she sold it with just enough panic in her voice to be believable. Don't try to play games, Vixen, Marcus warned. No games, she said, then to Reynolds. Now, speed brakes in gear. Full deployment. Reynolds hesitated for just a second, then pulled the levers. The aircraft shuddered violently as massive drag forces hit. Their speed dropped from 500 knots to barely 250 in seconds. The aircraft's nose pitched up, and warning alarms filled the cockpit. Both hostile jets shot past them, caught completely off guard. Marcus aircraft immediately went into a hard turn, pulling heavy G-forces to circle back. But the second jet's reaction was slower, clumsier. The pilot overcorrected, nearly stalling before recovering. Gear up! Speed brakes retracted. Full power, Naomi ordered. The 777's engines roared as Reynolds pushed the throttles forward. They'd lost significant altitude in the maneuver, but they'd also forced their pursuers to reposition, buying precious minutes. That was insane, Peterson said, his hands shaking slightly. That was just the beginning, Naomi replied. She watched as Marcus's jet completed its turn, coming back toward them with renewed aggression. The second jet was still struggling to match the maneuver. Marcus's voice exploded over the radio, fury replacing his earlier calm. Very clever, Vixen, but that little stunt cost you altitude and fuel. You're down to what, $20,000 FT? Keep this up and you'll be swimming. He was right. The maneuver had worked, but at a cost. They were lower, slower, and burning fuel at an alarming rate. But Naomi had learned something important. The second pilot wasn't in Marcus's league. That was an advantage she could exploit. Victor, she called back into the cabin. How much longer? 5 minutes, he replied, his voice strained. Maybe less. 5 minutes. They were still 15 minutes from help. The math didn't work. The hostile aircraft had reformed on their flanks, closer than before. Close enough that passengers could see details. The weapons pods under the wings, the dark-tinted canopies hiding the pilots within. Marcus waggled his wings, a fighter pilot's gesture that could mean hello or goodbye, depending on context. Here was a threat. That's when Naomi noticed something else. The way Marcus's aircraft moved, a slight hesitation in his controls, a particular pattern to his adjustments. She'd seen it before in their training days. It was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus was favoring his right hand, an old injury from a training accident, one that only bothered him under stress. He's hurting, she said quietly to Reynolds. The G-forces from that turn aggravated an old injury. How does that help us? It means he can't sustain high G maneuvers repeatedly. Every hard turn causes him pain, slows his reaction time. She picked up the radio again, switching to the guard frequency, but this time she didn't address Marcus formally. Hey, Webb, remember that night in Kandahar when you dislocated your shoulders showing off for those RAF pilots? Silence on the radio. You never did get full range of motion back, did you? Bet those 9GS you just pulled didn't feel great. When Marcus responded, his voice was colder than before. Ancient history, Naomi. Is it just like those 17 civilians? Our ancient history. Don't. The word came out sharp. Dangerous. You want to know what happened after you disappear, Marcus? Their families got nothing. No explanation, no justice, no closure. The Air Force buried it all, but I remember their names. All 17. Would you like me to recite them? Shut up. Amara Hassan, age 7, loved to draw butterflies. Her pictures were found in the rubble. I said, shut up. Marcus's aircraft suddenly rolled inverted in dove, passing directly over their cockpit, close enough that the wake turbulence shook the entire plane. Passengers screamed. Several overhead compartments popped open, spilling contents into the aisles. But Naomi smiled grimly. She got into him, made him emotional. Emotional pilots made mistakes. Grey Wing too. Maintain position, Marcus barked over the radio. I'm repositioning for. He cut off mid-sentence. Naomi looked out and saw why. On the horizon, barely visible in the pre-dawn light, were two distinct contrails, fast movers coming in high and hot. The cavalry was early. 15 minutes out, Peterson said, reading his instruments. How did they? They're going supersonic, Naomi realized, burning through fuel to reach us faster. Marcus saw them too. His aircraft suddenly became more aggressive, moving to their nose. 10 minutes, Vixen, you have 10 minutes to transfer those codes. Or I make this very simple. You fire on us, those jets will splash you, Naomi warned. Maybe, but you'll already be dead. His aircraft lined up directly in front of them, barely 500 millimeters ahead. From this position, he could fire straight into their cockpit. I've got nothing left to lose, Naomi. You took that from me 5 years ago. You took it from yourself when you murdered those civilians. I was following orders. Illegal orders. We both knew it. And look where righteousness got you. Discharged, disgraced, forgotten. At least I'm honest about what I am now. In a cabin, Victor suddenly closed his tablet. "Done," he announced. "The codes are corrupted. They'll look functional for about 30 seconds once accessed, then dissolve into garbage data." Crawford relayed this to Naomi through Jennifer, who rushed the information to the cockpit. "Good," Naomi said. She had one more card to play. "Captain, can you patch me through to the cabin speakers? I need everyone to hear this." Reynolds flipped a switch. "You're on." "Marcus Webb," Naomi said, her voice carrying through both the radio and the cabin speakers. "This is your former commanding officer speaking. I'm going to give you one chance to break off this attack. You were a good pilot once, a good man. That man is still in there somewhere." "That man died in Afghanistan," Marcus replied. "No, that man made a terrible mistake in Afghanistan, but mistakes can be redeemed. You can choose right now to fly away. The authorities will come for you eventually, but these innocent people will live. That's 17 lives you can't bring back, but 200 you can choose to save." The cabin was dead silent, everyone listening to this surreal negotiation between former comrades. "You really believe that redemption garbage?" Marcus asked, and for the first time, there was something other than anger in his voice. Uncertainty maybe, or pain. "I have to," Naomi replied. "Otherwise, what was it all for?" Long seconds passed. Marcus's aircraft held steady in front of them. The incoming fighters were now clearly visible, perhaps 10 minutes out. The second hostile aircraft had pulled back slightly, as if its pilot was having second thoughts. That's when it happened. Through the static, barely audible, came a different voice on the radio. Older, growly, with a Texas drawl. Naomi recognized immediately. "Spectre, this is Longhorn. Stand down, son. It's over. Colonel Harrison." Her old CO was on one of those incoming fighters. Colonel Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Stand down, Major Webb. That's a direct order. I'm not a major anymore, sir. You made sure of that." "No, son. You made sure of that when you pulled that trigger. But this doesn't have to end with more blood. Break off. Land at Shannon. Face what you've done like the officer you once were." Naomi held her breath. The entire aircraft seemed to hold its breath. Marcus' jet held position for endless seconds, the Predator deciding whether to strike or retreat. Then slowly it peeled away. Not dramatically, not aggressively, just a gentle bank to the left, losing altitude as it went. "Grey Wing 2, disengage," Marcus said over the radio, his voice tired. "Defeated. Mission abort." The second aircraft immediately broke away, diving toward the cloud deck and disappearing, but Marcus's jet continued its slow descending turn through the windows. Passengers watched as it circled them once, twice, then waggled its wings. This time, not a threat, but a farewell. Naomi Marcus's voice came one last time, privately on a discreet frequency only she would recognize from their flying days. "I'm sorry for all of it." Before she could respond, his aircraft rolled inverted and dove, disappearing into the clouds below. The radar tracked him briefly, heading toward Ireland, toward Shannon Airport, where authorities would be waiting. The cabin erupted, not in celebration, but in a collective release of tension. People sobbed, laughed, prayed, and held each other. The Anderson children finally felt safe enough to cry again, and their parents let their own tears flow. Crawford released the accomplice to the custody of the Irish authorities who would meet them. She seemed almost relieved it was over. Victor clutched his corrupted codes, worthless now, but still symbolic of what they prevented. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Reynolds announced, his voice rough with emotion, "we are now safely en route to London Heathrow. We should be on the ground in approximately 90 minutes. Emergency services will meet us there, but we're safe. We're all safe." The two military jets had formed up on their wings now, an honor guard for the remainder of their journey. Through the cockpit window, Naomi could see the pilot of the nearest fighter. He saluted, and she recognized the weathered face of Colonel Harrison behind the oxygen mask. She returned the salute even though she had no right to anymore. But in that moment, she wasn't a disgraced former officer or a civilian passenger. She was Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Walker, and she'd done her duty. So Reynolds said quietly beside her, "What now? You saved 200 lives. That has to count for something with the Air Force." Naomi looked out at the dawn, breaking over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Maybe, she said, but that's not why I did it. Then why? She thought about Marcus heading toward his fate in Ireland, about 17 civilians who died 5 years ago and 200 who live today, about redemption and duty and the choices that define us. Because it was the right thing to do, she said simply. Sometimes that has to be enough. Margaret Foster appeared in the cockpit doorway, having convinced Jennifer to let her through. Excuse me, I just wanted to say thank you. My grandchildren, they'll get to see their grandmother again because of you. Others were gathering behind her. The Andersons with their twins, Sergeant Williams and his soldiers, Crawford, even Victor. They all wanted to thank her, to shake her hand, to somehow express their gratitude for being alive. Naomi accepted their thanks graciously but uncomfortably. Heroes, she'd learned long ago, were just people who did what was necessary when it mattered most. She'd failed once 5 years ago to stop Marcus in time. Today, she'd succeeded. As the aircraft continued toward London, escorted by fighters and tracked by dozens of ground stations, now aware of their ordeal, Naomi finally allowed herself a moment of peace. She'd left the Air Force in disgrace, haunted by her failure. But here at 35,000 FT, she found something she'd lost. Not redemption exactly, but purpose. Colonel Walker Peterson said Colonel Harrison is asking if you want to speak with him. She took the headset. Harrison here, Walker, outstanding work. When we land, there are some people want to speak with you. The kind of people who can make previous difficulties disappear. Sir, I appreciate that. But no, the Air Force made a mistake 5 years ago. We chose the easy path, the political path, instead of the right one. You tried to stop a war crime and got punished for it. Webb committed one and disappeared into the shadows. That ends today. What are you saying, sir? I'm saying your commission is being reinstated if you want it. Full rank, full honors, full back pay, and a new position if you're interested. Training pilots in counterterrorism and aerial intervention. Making sure we have people ready if something like this ever happens again. Naomi was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the sunrise. Can I think about it, sir? Take all the time you need. You've earned that much and more. She handed the headset back and returned to the cabin where she found her middle seat waiting for her. 32B between Margaret Foster and David Brooks, who'd barely said a word the entire flight, but now looked at her with something approaching awe. So Margaret said as Naomi sat down. Exciting flight, wasn't it? Despite everything, Naomi actually laughed. You could say that. My husband would have liked you, Margaret continued. He always said the best pilots were the ones who did their job, not for glory or recognition, but because people were counting on them. Your husband sounds like he was a wise man. He was. He also said that sometimes the universe gives us a second chance to make things right. Not everyone gets that opportunity. Naomi thought about Marcus probably landing in Shannon now to face justice, about her own future, suddenly full of possibilities again, about second chances and the weight of choices. No, she agreed, not everyone does. The flight continued toward London, the rising sun turning the clouds below into a sea of gold. In a few hours, they'd land and become a media sensation. The hijacking that wasn't the passenger who saved the day, the redemption of a disgraced officer. But for now, they were just travelers sharing a moment of quiet gratitude for the sunrise, for the steady thrum of engines, for the simple gift of being alive. And in seat 32B, Naomi Walker closed her eyes, not to hide this time, but to rest. Her duty was done, at least for now. The fighter escort maintained perfect formation as Flight 447 continued toward London. But Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Marcus had given up too easily. She knew him, knew his pride, his stubbornness, his inability to accept defeat. The Marcus Webb she trained with would have had contingencies, backup plans, fail-safes. She was studying the radar display in the cockpit when Peterson noticed it first. Captain, we're getting intermittent hits on the scope. Small, fast-moving objects at our 8-wands. Reynolds leaned over to look. Birds at 30,000 ft. Peterson shook his head. Nothing biological flies this high. Naomi's blood went cold. Drones. Marcus deployed drones before he left. The words had barely left her mouth when the first one attached itself to the fuselage with a metallic clang that resonated through the aircraft. Passengers who had just begun to relax tensed again, looking around fearfully. "What was that?" Sarah Anderson asked, pulling her children closer. Through the window, a passenger in row 41 screamed, pointing at a small spider-like device crawling along the wing. It was about the size of a dinner plate, with multiple articulated legs that allowed it to grip the aircraft's surface despite the 400-knot wind stream. Colonel Harrison Naomi radio to the escort fighters. "We have drones attached to the aircraft. At least one, possibly more. Copy that. We see them. Count 3. No for devices. Can't engage without risking damage to your aircraft." For drones. Naomi's mind raced through possibilities. They wouldn't be explosive. Marcus wouldn't have deployed them if he intended to destroy the plane. They had to be something else. Surveillance, hacking devices, or... "Victor," she called back into the cabin. "Check your tablet. Any unusual activity?" Victor fumbled with his device, his face paling. "They're trying to establish a direct connection. The drones must have wireless capability. They're trying to bypass the corruption I created. Can they? If they get physical access to our systems, maybe these things could be carrying interface cables looking for data ports." Captain Reynolds looked grim. "There are several external data ports on a 777. Maintenance access sensor arrays. If those things find them, they'll have direct access to the flight management system," Naomi finished. Marcus could take control remotely. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Even if the mission failed, even if Marcus was captured, the drones could complete the objective autonomously. They'd either extract the codes or force the plane down at a predetermined location where another team could be waiting. "We need to get rid of them," Reynolds said. "How?" "We can't exactly send someone outside at this altitude." Naomi thought fast. The drones were electronic, sophisticated, but still machines. They'd have vulnerabilities. "Captain, what's our current cabin pressure differential?" "About 8 psi. Why can you rapidly depressurize and then re-pressurize specific sections? Create pressure waves." Reynolds' eyes widened with understanding. "The outflow valves. If we cycle them rapidly, we might create enough turbulence to shake those things loose." "It's risky," Peterson warned. "Could damage the aircraft." "Less risky than letting them into our systems," Naomi countered. She turned to address the cabin through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to perform some necessary system adjustments. You may experience pressure changes in your ears. This is normal. Please remain seated and follow crew instructions." Jennifer and the other flight attendants immediately began demonstrating the valve maneuver to help passengers equalize pressure. The soldiers helped elderly passengers who might struggle with the pressure changes. "Ready?" Reynolds asked, his hand on the outflow valve controls. "Do it!" Reynolds began cycling the valves. Open, closed, creating rhythmic pressure pulses that propagated along the aircraft's skin. The effect inside was uncomfortable but manageable, like ascending and descending repeatedly in a fast elevator. Through the windows, passengers watched as 2 of the drones lost their grip, tumbling away into the slipstream. But 2 remained, including the one near the wing route that seemed to have found something interesting. "It's accessing something," Victor said urgently, watching his tablet. "I'm seeing probe attempts through the aircraft's internal network." Crawford, who had been listening, had an idea. "The galley ovens. Can we superheat them? Create hot spots on the aircraft skin?" Jennifer overheard and immediately understood. "The coffee makers, too. Everything. We can create temperature differentials." "Do it," Naomi ordered. The flight attendants rushed to activate every heating element in the galleys. Coffee makers, ovens, water heaters, everything running at maximum. The aircraft's internal temperature began to rise, but more importantly, it created irregular hot spots along the fuselage. "What are you doing?" the accomplice woman asked Crawford, genuinely confused. "Thermi-R expansion," Crawford explained. "Metal expands when heated. If we heat sections irregularly, it might create enough surface deformation to break their grip." It was working through the windows. They could see one of the remaining drones struggling to maintain its hold as the metal beneath it expanded and contracted. But the one near the wing route had extended, combined with the pressure changes, thermal expansion, and electromagnetic interference. It was too much. The drone's grip failed and it tumbled away into the slipstream, but the one near the wing route held on, still transmitting. On the cockpit displays, systems were flickering between normal and corrupted states. The aircraft's heading began to change despite Reynolds' inputs. "It's overriding my controls," Reynolds said, fighting the yoke. "It's trying to turn us." Naomi looked at the navigation display. The drone was trying to redirect them toward a small airfield in Wales, exactly the kind of place where another team could be waiting. "Colonel Harrison," she radioed, "we need you to do something unorthodox. Can you create wake turbulence directly over our wing route? Precision flying, but it might shake that last drone loose." There was a pause, then Harrison's voice. "That's dangerous, Walker. At this speed, wake turbulence could damage your aircraft. Less dangerous than letting that thing take control." "Trust me, Colonel. Just like old times you fly, I'll call the shots." "Roger that. Stand by." One of the F-15s peeled away from formation, climbing above them. Naomi watched, calculating angles and distances with the precision that had once made her one of the Air Force's best. "Captain, when I say I need you to bank left exactly 15 degrees, not 14, not 16, exactly 15. Reynolds nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. The F-5 positioned itself above and ahead of them, maybe 500 FT separation, dangerously close for aircraft moving at these speeds. "Now," Naomi commanded. Reynolds banked left. At the same moment, the F-15 descended sharply, its wake vortices spiraling tubes of disturbed air rolling directly over their wing. The effect was immediate and violent. The entire aircraft shuddered. Overhead compartments flew open. The drone caught in the vortex was ripped from its position and sent spinning into the void. "It's gone," Victor announced. The connection severed, systems returning to normal. The cabin erupted in cheers. Even the normally composed Jennifer allowed herself a moment of relief, leaning against the galley counter. "Outstanding flying, Harrison," Naomi radioed. "Likewise, Walker. You always did have a talent for the impossible." As the immediate crisis passed and systems returned to normal, Reynolds noticed something troubling on his fuel display. "We have a problem. All that maneuvering, the pressure cycling, running at full power. We've burned more fuel than anticipated. We might not make Heathrow." Peterson ran quick calculations. "Shannon's closer. We could divert there." "Where Marcus is being arrested," Naomi said quietly. "That can't be coincidence. This whole thing, the drones, the fuel burn, it was designed to force us to Shannon. Another trap, maybe. Or maybe Marcus wanted to ensure we'd be there when he faced justice with him. It's hard to tell." Reynolds made the command decision. "We're diverting to Shannon. Contact ATC, declare minimum fuel." As the aircraft began its turn toward Ireland, something unexpected happened. The radio crackled with a familiar voice. Marcus broadcasting from the ground. "Flight 447, this is Webb. I'm on the ground at Shannon, surrounded by about 50 law enforcement officers. Before they take me away, I need to say something." Reynolds looked at Naomi, who nodded. "Let him speak." "I'm transmitting the kill codes for any remaining drones in the area," Marcus continued. "There shouldn't be any, but I'm making sure. I'm also providing the authorities with a full list of everyone involved in this operation. The Grey Wing organization, our contacts, our methods, everything." "Why?" Naomi asked over the radio. "Because you were right. 17 lives I can't bring back, but 200 I can try to save. And because I'm tired of being the monster you had to stop. I want to be the man you once trusted to fly on your wing." There was a pause then. "The authorities have prepared a secure area for your landing. No media, no crowds, just medical personnel and investigators. It's the least I can do." The transmission ended through the cockpit windows. They could see the Irish coastline approaching, the green fields emerging from morning mist. "Do we trust him?" Reynolds asked. "We don't have a choice," Naomi replied. "We need that runway." The descent into Shannon was surreal in its normalcy after everything they'd been through. The controllers guided them with professional calm, as if aircraft arriving with military escorts and terrorist threats were routine. Perhaps in today's world, they were. As they descended through 10,000 FT, Naomi made her way back to her seat. The cabin had taken on an almost euphoric atmosphere. Strangers who had been united by terror were now bonded by survival. Business cards were being exchanged, phone numbers shared, promises to stay in touch made. The Anderson family was different, though. The twins were quiet, processing what they'd experienced in the way children do internally, slowly with occasional questions that cut to the heart of things. Mom, Emma asked, "Was that man really going to hurt us?" Sarah struggled for an answer, but Naomi spoke up. "He was angry and hurt, and sometimes it makes people do bad things. But in the end, he chose not to. That's what matters." Like in the stories, Jacob said, "The villain becomes good at the end." Something like that. Naomi agreed, though she knew the real world was rarely that simple. Margaret Foster was writing in a small notebook, documenting everything while it was fresh. "My grandchildren will never believe this," she said. "I'm not sure I believe it myself." Sergeant Williams and his men had formed an informal honor guard around Victor, who still clutched his tablet with its now corrupted codes. The mission that had nearly cost 200 lives had ended with the data destroyed and the conspiracy exposed. Crawford sat with the accomplice who had been surprisingly forthcoming once she realized the operation had failed. Her name was Anna Volov, and she'd been coerced into helping after her family was threatened. With Marcus's confession and cooperation, she might avoid serious jail time. 5 minutes to landing came Reynolds' voice over the intercom. "Flight attendants prepare for arrival." But this wasn't a normal landing preparation. Outside the windows, passengers could see the F-15s still maintaining escort, and on the ground the flashing lights of dozens of emergency vehicles waiting for them. The landing was smooth, Reynolds' experience showing as he brought the wounded bird down gently, despite everything they'd been through. As they taxied toward the terminal, passengers could see the massive security presence: police vehicles, military trucks, ambulances, and in the distance, held back by barriers, news vans with satellite dishes already deployed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reynolds announced, "we're safely on the ground at Shannon Airport. Please remain seated until instructed by local authorities. And thank you. Your courage and cooperation saved lives today." Through the windows, Naomi could see a figure standing between two police cars, handscuffed in front of him. Marcus Webb, looking older than his years, worn down by choices that had led him from decorated officer to international criminal. Their eyes met across the distance, and he nodded once. Acknowledgement, apology, and farewell, all in one gesture. The authorities boarded the plane methodically. First, medical personnel checking on passengers, particularly the elderly and children. Then investigators taking initial statements, securing Victor's tablet, and formally arresting Anavalov. Colonel Harrison was among them, still in his flight suit, having landed his F-5 just minutes before. He made his way directly to Naomi. "Outstanding work, Colonel," he said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear the rank. "I'm not a colonel anymore, sir." "About that, I've been on the phone with the Pentagon for the last hour. The Secretary of the Air Force himself wants to meet with you. The President has been briefed. What you did today, it's going to change how we train for these scenarios." Around them, passengers were being escorted off the plane in small groups. Each would be debriefed, their statements recorded, their experiences documented for what would undoubtedly be extensive investigations and reports. The Anderson family paused as they passed Naomi's row. Tom Anderson extended his hand. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Just hug your kids," Naomi replied. "That's enough." Emma tugged on Naomi's sleeve. "Are you a superhero?" Naomi knelt to the girl's level. "No, I'm just someone who learned how to fly planes. But you know what? You're brave today, too. That makes you a hero in my book." As the family moved on, Margaret Foster stood to leave. She pressed something into Naomi's hand, a page torn from her notebook. "I wrote down what I saw," she said. "Not for the investigators, but for you. So you remember that today you didn't just save our lives, you saved your own soul." Naomi looked at the handwritten note, which simply read, "She was lost, but now is found. She was grounded, but today she soared. The cabin was nearly empty now." Crawford shook Naomi's hand firmly. "If you ever need a reference for anything, job, combination, whatever you call me." Victor was one of the last to leave, escorted by intelligence officers who would debrief him extensively. He paused beside Naomi. The codes: they wanted them to crash a Chinese military satellite into the International Space Station. It would have started a war. The magnitude of what they'd prevented hit Naomi Ao. This hadn't just been about one plane or 200 passengers. It had been about preventing a global catastrophe. Finally, only the crew remained. Jennifer and the other flight attendants formed an impromptu receiving line, each hugging Naomi in turn. "If you ever want a job as a flight attendant," Jennifer said through tears, "I'll personally recommend you." Reynolds and Peterson were the last. The captain removed his wings, the same ones he'd worn for 20 years, and pinned them to Naomi's collar. "These belong to someone who exemplifies what flying is really about," he said. "Duty, courage, and bringing everyone home. I can't accept these. You can and you will. In 30 years of flying, I've never seen anything like what you did today. You didn't just save our passengers, you saved aviation itself from becoming a weapon of terror." As Naomi finally descended the stairs to the tarmac, she found Colonel Harrison waiting with a secure phone. "There's someone who wants to speak with you," he said. She took the phone, expecting some Pentagon official. Instead, she heard a young voice, tentative and grateful. "Miss Walker, this is Amara Hassan. I was named after my aunt who died in Afghanistan 5 years ago. My family was told it was a terrorist attack, but we never believed it. Today, watching the news, hearing what that man confessed, we finally know the truth and we know you try to stop it. Thank you for trying. Thank you for not forgetting." Naomi couldn't speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the unexpected closure of circles she'd thought would never complete. "I'm sorry I couldn't save her," she finally managed. "But you saved 200 others today. Maya will be proud. We all are." After the call ended, Naomi stood on the tarmac, watching the sunrise paint the Irish sky. In the distance, she could see Marcus being loaded into a secure transport, heading toward justice long delayed. The passengers were being processed in the terminal, their stories already becoming legend. And somewhere in offices in Washington and London and Beijing, officials were scrambling to understand how close the world had come to disaster. So Harrison said, standing beside her, "Ready to come back? The Air Force needs you, Naomi. Today proved that." Naomi thought about the offer. Full reinstatement, vindication, a chance to train the next generation. Then she looked at the 777 that had carried them through the night, battered but unbroken, and at the crew preparing it for its eventual continuation to London. "Yes," she said simply, "but on one condition, name it. We create a civilian-military liaison program. Commercial pilots train for these scenarios. Military pilots who understand civilian aviation. No more separation between the two worlds." Today showed that threats don't distinguish between military and civilian targets. Harrison smiled. "Already thought of that. We're calling it the Walker Protocol. You'll head it up. The Walker Protocol. From disgraced officer to the name on a new defensive doctrine." Life had a strange way of balancing the scales. As the emergency vehicles began to disperse and normal operations slowly resumed at Shannon Airport, Naomi took one last look at the plane that had been their battlefield and refuge. In a few hours, it would be swarmed by investigators and engineers, its every system analyzed, its story documented in minute detail. But for now, it stood as a monument to what ordinary people could do when pushed to extraordinary circumstances. A testament to courage found in unexpected places. In a grandmother with a Wi-Fi router, an 8-year-old with a music app, an ex-cop who refused to stand idle, soldiers without weapons who still stood guard, and a pilot who'd lost everything finding redemption in the sky. "Ready to go?" Harrison asked. "There's a transport waiting to take you to London. Then Washington." "One more thing," Naomi said. She walked over to where Marcus was being held, the guards tensing as she approached. Marcus looked up at her, his face a map of regret and resignation. "Come to gloat." "No. Come to say that I'll testify at your trial. Not against you. For you. You stopped when it mattered. That has to count for something. It doesn't erase what I did." "No, but maybe it's a start." She turned to walk away, then paused. "That maneuver, you pulled the inverted pass. You telegraphed it. You're still favoring that shoulder." Despite everything, Marcus actually smiled. "And you still see everything, don't you? Some things never change." "Some things do," Naomi replied. "We're proof of that." As she walked back to Harrison and the waiting transport, Naomi felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Peace, not complete, not perfect, but real. The ghosts of 17 civilians would always be with her, but now they were joined by the living presence of 200 others who would go home to their families because, when it mattered most, everyone involved had chosen life over death, courage over fear, and ultimately redemption over revenge. The transport flight to London gave Naomi 3 hours to process everything that had happened. She sat in the military aircraft's sparse cabin, Colonel Harrison across from her, both of them silent as Ireland fell away below. The adrenaline was finally fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the weight of decisions made in split seconds that would be analyzed for years. "There's something you should know," Harrison finally said, breaking the silence. "The Chinese detected the satellite anomaly. Their bird went offline for 17 seconds before Marcus's drones were neutralized. They thought it was an attack." Naomi's stomach dropped. How close did we come? Their strategic forces went to elevated readiness. Another few minutes and they would have initiated countermeasures. We literally prevented World War II at 30,000 RFT. The magnitude of it was almost incomprehensible. What had started as one man's revenge plot had nearly triggered global catastrophe, all because of a mission 5 years ago that should never have happened. "The families of those 17 civilians," Naomi said quietly, "have they all been notified about what really happened?" Harrison nodded. "The Pentagon is reaching out to each one personally. With Marcus's confession, we can finally give them the truth. It won't bring their loved ones back, but at least they'll have answers." Through the window, London was approaching, the Thames winding through the city like a silver ribbon. Somewhere down there, Flight 447's passengers were being processed, their statements taken, their lives forever changed by night. They'd never forget. "The President wants to award you the Medal of Honor," Harrison said. "No," Naomi replied immediately. "I don't want medals. I just want to make sure this never happens again. The Walker Protocol, it's bigger than that. Marcus wasn't created in a vacuum. The system that covered up those civilian deaths, that discharged me for trying to stop them, that let him disappear into the private military world, that system is still in place." Harrison's expression darkened. "You're talking about major reforms. I'm talking about accountability, real oversight. No more black ops that can go wrong with no consequences. No more scapegoating the people who try to do the right thing. That's going to make you enemies, powerful ones." "Then I'll need powerful allies," Naomi said, meeting his eyes. "Starting with you." The landing at RAF Halt was deliberately low-key, away from the media circus at Heathrow, where Flight 447's passengers were giving their accounts to a hungry press. A convoy of black vehicles waited on the tarmac, ready to take them to the emergency cabinet office briefing room, where British and American officials were gathering. But first, there was someone else waiting. As Naomi descended the aircraft stairs, she saw a familiar figure standing by one of the vehicles. Jennifer Martinez, still in her flight attendant uniform, looking exhausted but determined. "I had to see you before you disappeared into meetings." Jennifer said, "The passengers, we've been talking, everyone from the flight. We want to testify publicly if necessary about what you did. Margaret Foster is already organizing everyone, getting contact information, making sure our stories are heard." "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is," Jennifer interrupted. "You saved us. But more than that, you showed us what courage looks like, what doing the right thing looks like, even when it costs you everything. We're not going to let them bury this or spin it or classify it into obscurity." She handed Naomi an envelope, email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles, 200 witnesses to what happened up there. 200 people who owe you their lives and won't forget it. The meeting at the cabinet office was a blur of uniforms and suits, British accents mixing with American. Everyone trying to understand how a commercial flight had become the center of an international incident. Naomi recounted the events with military precision, answered questions from intelligence officials, defense ministers, and aviation authorities. But her mind kept drifting to Marcus, sitting in a cell somewhere in Ireland, facing the consequences of choices made in anger and pain. They'd been so similar once, two of the Air Force's best, dedicated to duty and honor. One split-second decision in the skies over Afghanistan had sent them on diverging path that had finally intersected again over the Atlantic. Colonel Walker, the British Defense Secretary, was saying, "Your actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic international incident. The United Kingdom owes you a debt of gratitude. With respect, sir, I had help." The crew of Flight 447, the passengers, even Marcus Webb in the end, everyone played a part. This wasn't a military operation. It was civilians and military working together, using whatever they had available from coffee makers to children's toys. That's the lesson here. The American Secretary of Defense leaned forward, which brings us to your proposal, the Walker Protocol. Tell us more. For the next hour, Naomi outlined her vision. Commercial pilots trained in basic defensive tactics, military liaison at major airports, rapid response protocols that didn't rely on shooting down hijacked aircraft, technology to counter drones and electronic intrusions. Most importantly, a system where civilian and military aviation work together, instead of in separate silos. The threats we face don't distinguish between military and civilian targets, she concluded. Neither should our defenses. There was skepticism, of course, budget concerns, jurisdictional issues, the sheer complexity of international coordination. But there was also the undeniable fact that traditional methods had failed, and only Naomi's unorthodox approach had prevented disaster. 3 days later, Naomi stood in a secure facility in Dublin where Marcus was being held pending extradition. He looked smaller in the orange jumpsuit. The swagger and confidence that had defined him stripped away, leaving only a tired man facing the weight of his crimes. "You came," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I said I would testify. I keep my promises." They sat across from each other at a metal table, guards watching from the corners, cameras recording everything. "Why did you really stand down?" Naomi asked. "It wasn't just my speech or Harrison's order. You had us. You could have completed your mission." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember that kid in Kandahar? The one who used to sell us fruit outside the base? Ahmed. He was 12, 13. He'd had a birthday the week before it happened. His sister Amara was one of the 17. Marcus's voice cracked. "When I saw those families on the plane, those kids the same age as the ones, I couldn't do it again. I couldn't be responsible for more children growing up without parents, more parents losing children. The satellite attack would have killed thousands. I know I told myself it was different, that it was military targets, that the chaos would lead to changes accountability. But watching you protect those people, seeing that family with the twins, I realized I become the monster I claimed to be fighting against. You were angry. Pain makes us do terrible things. You were angry too. They destroyed your career, took away everything you'd worked for. But you didn't become me." "I had better friends," Naomi said simply. "People who reminded me who I was, even when the Air Force tried to erase me. You isolated yourself, let the anger fester, and now you face justice, real justice, not the cover-up we got 5 years ago. Your confession will be public. The families will have their day in court. And maybe, just maybe, the system that created us both will finally change." Marcus nodded slowly. "The Walker Protocol. I heard about it. It's good. It's what we should have had from the beginning. It's a start." As she stood to leave, Marcus called out, "Naomi, that family, the ones with the twins, tell them. Tell them I'm sorry for everything." A week later, Naomi stood before the Senate Armed Services Committee in Washington, the room packed with media, military officials, and most importantly, several passengers from Flight 447 who had flown in to support her. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee chair, began the hearing. "Colonel Walker, you've been called here to discuss the events of Flight 447 and your proposed Walker Protocol. But first, this committee owes you an apology. 5 years ago, you were wrongfully discharged for trying to prevent a war crime. That was a failure of leadership at every level. Effective immediately, your record has been cleared, your rank restored, and back pay authorized." The gallery erupted in applause. Naomi saw Margaret Foster in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The Anderson family was there too, the twins wearing matching Colonel Walker is our hero t-shirts that someone had made. "Thank you, Senator. But I'm not here for vindication. I'm here to make sure no one else goes through what those passengers experienced, what those 17 civilians in Afghanistan experienced, what Major Webb experienced when the system abandoned him to his worst impulses. Over the next 3 hours, she testified about the flight, the failures that had led to it, and the solutions the Walker Protocol would provide. She was followed by Captain Reynolds, who spoke eloquently about the need for better coordination between civilian and military aviation. Then Victor Clough, under immunity, detailed how easily civilian aircraft could be targeted by those with the right knowledge and tools. But the most powerful testimony came from Sarah Anderson. My children asked me if the bad man on the plane was going to hurt us. She said, her voice steady despite visible emotion. I didn't know what to tell them, but then Colonel Walker stood up, and even though I didn't know who she was, I knew we were going to be okay because she had that look. The look of someone who would die before letting harm come to innocence. That's the kind of person we need protecting our skies. That's the kind of protocol we need in place. The committee voted unanimously to fund the Walker Protocol. 6 months later, Naomi stood in a simulator at the newly established Joint Aviation Defense Center in Colorado. Around her, commercial pilots were learning basic threat assessment, while Air Force pilots practiced coordination with civilian air traffic control. It was the first class of what would become a standard part of aviation training worldwide. The key, she told a mixed group of civilian and military pilots, is to remember that up there, we're all on the same side. The threats we face don't care about the insignia on our wings or the company on our fuselage. We protect each other, and we protect those who trust us to bring them home safely. In the back of the room, she noticed a familiar face. Jennifer Martinez had left commercial flying to become one of the protocol's first instructor coordinators, teaching flight crews how to handle extraordinary situations with ordinary tools. After the session, they walked together through the facility past walls lined with photos from Flight 447, not glorifying the danger, but honoring the cooperation that had saved lives. Any regrets? Jennifer asked. You could have had any position in the Air Force. Full reinstatement, choice of commands. Instead, you're here teaching. This is where I need to be, Naomi replied. Every pilot we train, every crew we prepare, every protocol we establish, it's prevention. It's making sure there's never another Marcus Webb, never another Flight 447. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Margaret Foster, who had become an unlikely friend and correspondent. The older woman had written a book about the experience, with all proceeds going to a fund for the families of the Afghan civilians killed 5 years ago. The message was simple. First copy off the press dedicated to the woman who taught us all how to fly without wings. Another message followed this one from an official source. Marcus Webb had been sentenced to 25 years with the possibility of parole in 15. He provided extensive information about the private military world, leading to dozens of arrests and the dismantling of several mercenary organizations. From prison, he'd started corresponding with the families of his victims, beginning a long journey toward whatever redemption might be possible. That evening, Naomi stood on the observation deck of the center, watching planes crisscross the Colorado sky. Commercial flights, military aircraft, all sharing the same airspace, all part of the same system. Now, Colonel Harrison joined her. Now a general and director of the entire program. The Chinese want to implement the protocol. So do the Europeans, the Russians, even we started on that flight? It's going global. Good. The threats are global. The response should be too. There's something else. The president has scheduled the Medal of Honor ceremony. I know you said you didn't want it, but I'll accept it, Naomi interrupted. But only if the entire crew of Flight 447 is there. And the passengers. This isn't my medal, it's ours. 3 weeks later, in the Rose Garden of the White House, Naomi stood as the president placed the medal around her neck. But the real moment came after when 200 people, passengers and crew from Flight 447, stood as one to applaud not just her, but each other. Their shared experience of terror transformed into triumph. Young Emma Anderson broke from the crowd and ran to Naomi, hugging her legs tightly. Are you still not a superhero? She asked, looking up with bright eyes. Naomi knelt down to the girl's level, the medal heavy around her neck. No, it's with you. But you know what I learned? We don't need superheroes. We just need regular people who are brave when it matters. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Naomi noticed someone standing at the edge of the gathering, a young woman in Air Force dress uniform, fresh from the academy, waiting nervously to approach. Colonel Walke, I am Lieutenant Sakin. I'm your first official student in the Walker Protocol Advanced Program. I joined the Air Force because of what you did, because you showed that doing the right thing matters more than following the wrong orders. Looking at this young officer, Naomi saw herself 10 years ago. Idealistic, determined, ready to serve. But this lieutenant would enter a different Air Force, one changed by the hard lessons of Flight 447 and the 17 who died before. Welcome to the program, Lieutenant. Ready to learn how to protect the sky? Yes, ma'am, ready. As the sun set over Washington, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Naomi Walker stood surrounded by the lives she'd saved and the future she was building. The woman who had boarded Flight 447 as a sleeping passenger had awakened to become the guardian of a new era in aviation security. The threats would continue to evolve. New dangers would emerge. But now there was a protocol, a system, a network of trained individuals ready to respond. The Walker Protocol wasn't just about tactics and training. It was about the fundamental belief that when crisis comes, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And somewhere in a small apartment in London, Margaret Foster was writing the epilogue to her book, ending with words that would become the unofficial motto of the Walker Protocol. In the sky, we are all connected. In danger, we are all family. In courage, we are all capable of flight. If you had the skills to save hundreds of lives, but using them meant confronting the darkest failure of your past, would you step forward or stay silent? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances.